What's going on, Bengals fans? Stone Shields on hand for another edition of Chatterbox Bengals. And coming up on today's show, wanted to spend some more time discussing the Bengals' first 53-man roster here. Kind of some takeaways, definitely a couple of position groups I want to focus on. Obviously, I had a live show yesterday with Craig Sandlin where we kind of broke down everyone that made the team for Cincinnati. But I do think there's some noteworthy takeaways and what feels kind of like a top-heavy roster for Cincinnati, as it probably should be considering all the money that's being allocated to just a handful of players. But some question marks certainly at the back end of the roster. I think some people expected Cincinnati to be active on the waiver wire. They were not. They have not, as of filming this video, added to their roster today. So we're going to be spending some time talking about that here on today's show. Do, of course, want to invite you guys to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/ChatterboxSports, your one-stop shop for the best Cincinnati sports coverage right here at the channel. Big one for the Reds tonight. It's been kind of an up-and-down West Coast road trip for them. Obviously dropped the series to Arizona and now are the verge of getting swept for the first time this year against the Los Angeles Dodgers. It is Lodolo and Ohtani on the mound. You may have heard of him tonight. Bit of an earlier first pitch, 8:40, I believe, but the Reds have dropped back to 3.5 games behind the Mets for the final NL wildcard spot, so it feels like a very pivotal ball game tonight. Nick Kirby, Trace Fowler have you covered in the ninth inning and after the ball game. Also have a pregame show up on the channel, but all kinds of Cincinnati sports coverage here at Chatterbox Sports. Also going to be talking about some more national sports coming up soon over the next couple of weeks here on the channel, so make sure you want to stick around and hit that sub button so you don't miss out on any of our coverage. All right, let's talk trenches here for the Cincinnati Bengals. I think the biggest kind of, when you looked at the Bengals 53-man roster and kind of said, that's significant. I think the two things that popped to mind were that you only kept 8 offensive linemen and that you kept 11 defensive linemen. Typically, you're in a spot where you're probably keeping 10 of each, maybe 9 one, 10 on the other, but 8 and 11, those are pretty low numbers and pretty high numbers there when you're talking about the offensive line. I think a lot of us are concerned about the offensive line, right? There's several starters that you have a lot of confidence in. Amarius Mims, of course, Orlando Brown Jr., your tackles, but it's a violent sport. It's a violent position there on the offensive line, and they've had injury concerns in the past. What is the depth behind them going to look like? We all love Ted Karras there as well. And you're going with Lucas Patrick and Dylan Fairchild as your starters. Zach Taylor yesterday at his press conference was hesitant to name Lucas Patrick the starter for Week 1 in Cleveland, but I feel like in a couple of days he will officially do that. Patrick, of course, has been banged up on top of the fact that he hasn't, played necessarily great football for Cincinnati as well. But at this point, as we get closer and closer each and every day to Week 1, it feels like Lucas Patrick is going to be that guy. But the Bengals still need to add to that position. The 3 guys behind him, of course, are Jalen Rivers and Matt Lee and Cody Ford. Right? I think a lot of us were hoping that out of the group of Cordell Volson, Jackson Kirkland, Devin Cochran, Andrew Stuber, Andrew Coker, somebody could emerge and at least prove that, hey, they could be a semi-reliable backup. Obviously, Cordell Volson out for the year. A couple of those guys nicked up as well. I kind of thought it was going to be Jackson Kirkland. I thought he was going to, vault his way onto this roster and kind of be that 9th offensive lineman for you, but he gets released. He's not on the football team. Thought he showed some good things in the preseason last year. I think he probably had a stronger offseason last year going into 2024 than he did this offseason going into, of course, the 2025 regular season. He's got the versatility to play inside and out, but ultimately Cincinnati says, you know what, not good enough to make the roster, and we are going to keep 8 guys. Zach Taylor also said that they're constantly going to be, evaluating that group and seeing if they could perhaps bring in help there along the offensive line. And in my eyes, that means at some point here in the coming days, Duke Tobin and the front office are going to make a signing at that offensive line spot. Who it's going to be, that question obviously still up in the air at this point. We've talked in great length about Dalton Reisner here at the channel. Seems to be a guy at the top of the list. He's still kind of feeling it out. He has other teams that are interested in his services as well. Could he perhaps land in Cincinnati? Worked out with the team last week. I think he's at the top of that list. But also Cole Strange was released by New England yesterday. The name might sound familiar. He was a first-round pick in 2022. Played under Scott Peters, who's your new offensive line coach, his tutelage last year in New England. He's, as I mentioned, a former first-round pick. Kind of the viral clip of Sean McVay and Les Snead has kind of resurfaced online where The Patriots essentially picked Cole Strange, and McVay and Snead had a laugh basically saying we were evaluating, perhaps picking him at 104, and he goes in the first round. And, Bill Belichick, of course, had a history of, understanding the right guys to take and understanding steals and whatnot, getting guys at a good price. But there in 2022, rough draft for Bill Belichick and company, seemingly as his time came to an end in New England. He really struggled with the draft, and that pick obviously didn't really pan out. 3 seasons, 29, I believe, starts for Cole Strange, but ultimately he gets released, and you could perhaps see a reunion with Scott Peters here in Cincinnati. Cole Strange is a name to keep an eye on just because of those obvious ties. Anything beyond that really hasn't been reported, but I think Cole Strange to the Bengals could perhaps be something that transpires in the coming days and weeks. But as I mentioned at the top, Bengals not active in the waiver wire. I think some people out there, I wouldn't say myself included, but thought they might make a move. But Cincinnati trusting the guys they have on their team. We'll see how it pans out for them. All right, let's continue our trench conversation here with the defensive line. Now, it's very interesting, and Paul Dehner Jr. points this out in his column for The Athletic. There's different ways you can handle how many guys you put on your roster, and it kind of shows you feelings that you have as a coaching staff and an organization. And one approach is don't take a lot of guys, and that means you probably don't feel good about a group, and then perhaps take too many guys, and that also shows that you don't really have full confidence in a group, and that's what you're seeing on the offensive line and the defensive line. Offensive line didn't take quite as much. Defensive line probably took 1 or 2 too many. 2 UDFAs make the roster. I think a lot of us expected Howard Cross III out of Notre Dame to make the team, but the fact he made the team and also Eric Gregory out of Arkansas also made the team. Look, if you're a UDFA, Zach Taylor has said this, come to Cincinnati, right? Because they're going to give you an opportunity to make the team. The Bengals have had several UDFAs make the team. Muma Jongmeda, of course, last year made the team as a UDFA. He's stashed on the practice squad this year, but 2 guys, Howard Cross and Eric Gregory, and also Cam Grandy, a former UDFA, he makes the team once again for Cincinnati. So lots of opportunity here with the Bengals for UDFAs to make the ball club. But basically, Zach Taylor at his press conference yesterday alluded to the fact that, you can run through your depth rather quickly there along the defensive line, and that's certainly a problem that Cincinnati endured last year in 2024. Sheldon Rankins had the hamstring. He was banged up. He was out early. B.J. Hill, he was a little bit nicked up, and then it ultimately led to you signing a 34-year-old Lawrence Guy off the streets to come play football for you, and that really was not a good situation at all for Cincinnati. And, perhaps keeping 11 guys can help with that, but certainly going to be a room that Cincinnati looks at to try to, better off their defense and improve upon what they were able to do last year on the football field. Certainly going to be interesting to see what kind of roles Howard Cross and Eric Gregory have. Again, they could be down on the practice squad before the first game. There's no guarantee that they will be out there for Cleveland. Obviously, not everybody's going to dress for that game either. So we'll see if either one of those guys dress. But congratulations to them. They make the team. We'll see if their depth is relied on and if they have a role on the football field with the starters for Cincinnati this year. Defensive line, certainly another interesting position. Let's talk safety a little bit on today's show as well. I think a lot of us have viewed offensive line and safety as kind of your 2 biggest weak points. Corner I would throw in there as well. You could argue the entirety of the defense, but safety in particular is a position that I have a lot of concern with, and I think bad safety play really impacted how bad your defense was last year for the Bengals. But Dejon Anthony, 7th-round pick last year out of Ole Miss, made the team last year. He's banged up. He's on IR return, so he's eligible to come back for Week 5. I don't even know if he was a shoo-in to make the roster had he been healthy, but you needed help there at that 4th safety spot, and ultimately the Bengals are going with P.J. Jules, who is also another UDFA. Several UDFAs on this ball club for Cincinnati. Southern Illinois, he was a practice squad guy last year. Bengals love everything about him. His work ethic that he brings every day, his attention to detail, and his competitive spirit, obviously, at the top of that line as well. And they could be looking at him as a guy on special teams to really have to step up. And should, Geno Stone, he's got the hammy. We'll see how things go with him. Jordan Battle, he struggled. Yeah, he could be a guy that could be playing safety for you for Cincinnati. I think some people expected the Bengals to go after a safety on the waiver wire, and this is kind of to be short-lived for P.J. Jules, but as of filming this video, they are sticking with him as that fourth safety. And, he wasn't really a guy a lot of people had on their radar as possibly making this team, but with the injury to Dejon Anthony, a spot opens up. They like the consistency that P.J. Jules has brought over the course of the offseason workouts and training camp, and he finds himself on this team for Cincinnati. So lots of guys, several UDFAs that I just mentioned, obviously concerns there along the offensive line. These are some of the problems you run into when you're paying your quarterback a ton of money, when you're paying two weapons a ton of money, when you're paying Trey Hendrickson a significant raise, paying him $30 million this year. You run into these kinds of issues at the back end of your roster, and it really comes down to two things: coaching, right, development of players, and also how you evaluate guys. If you're Duke Tobin and the Bengals, scouts, their staff, right, if they brought in these right players that can really execute and at least be formidable players for you on the football field. Do they need to be Pro Bowlers? No. But when you have lots of money going to only a few players, you got to rely on guys at the back end of your roster to produce, something all the successful teams have been able to do. New England, Kansas City, obviously the two dynasties that come to mind. We'll see what kind of impact these UDFAs have for Cincinnati. And I do want to round out today's show talking about long snapper a little bit. Look, I don't pretend to know the ins and outs of what it's like to be a long snapper. I was surprised that they went with William Wagner over Cal Adamitis. I think, to me, my thought process going into that battle was, if it's a tie and nobody has a bad snap in the preseason or you don't hear about one in camp, they'll probably go with Adamitis since he has been around longer and he was the guy last year. Well, apparently it was a tie, but ultimately they decided to go with William Wagner. Why? I don't know, to be completely honest with you. He's a 24-year-old, right, rookie, played at Michigan. He certainly played in big games in front of big crowds, being a part of some of the success that Michigan has had in recent years, and he did a great job. It's another year, another change in operation for Evan McPherson, which I don't think necessarily is the greatest thing in the world. I think all of us still wish it was, Kevin Huber and Clark Karras were kind of the operation, right? Because that seemingly was flawless in that 2021-2022 season as well for the Bengals. But you've had some turnover there. Rico's back. He's your holder. And now, once again, you make another switch from Adamitis to Wagner. But it's very critical to have that operation clean because all the pressure and all the credit goes to Evan McPherson when it goes through. But, he's fighting to still prove that he's a kicker in this league. Now, he's one of the best kickers, or one of the 32 best kickers on the planet, I would say. I think a lot of us as rookie year are like, yeah, he's one of the best in the league. Well, now he's got to prove that he can still be a starting kicker for an organization after his past two seasons, and a change in that operation doesn't make me feel great, but at the same time, Darren Simmons, Zach Taylor, they seem pretty confident in this kid out of Michigan, William Wagner, another UDFA, by the way, obviously, as a long snapper. But he's going to be the guy that Cincinnati goes with over Cal Adamitis. Be on the lookout for Cincinnati to make a move, right? We talked about Cole Strange earlier in today's show. Feels like only a matter of time before they add an offensive lineman, especially after only keeping 8 on their roster. We'll see what kind of gymnastics they have to go through in order to make room for that player. But that position there, offensive line, interior offensive line, and safety are the two that I've got my eyes on, and we will have some content coming your way if the Bengals make any more roster changes. But overall, I think a few surprises for Cincinnati when we saw the roster get released yesterday, and obviously there will be tons of changes in the roster throughout the season and probably be some changes prior to week 1 in Cleveland as well. That will do it for today's show. If you made it to the end of today's show, help us out and hit that thumbs up icon for me right now.